everyone. You're watching News Now from Fox. I'm Regina Gonzalez, joined today by pollster and chairman of Insider Advantage, Mr. Matt Towery. Mr. Towery, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am good. We finally made it to Election Day. I'm sure you've been very busy. So first off, I want to ask you if you can give myself and the viewers a little polling 101. Tell us really how you do your job.
Well, it's changed over the years. I started in this business sort of by chance. And at that time period, we were making phone calls directly to home phones. It was purely home phones. Cell phones were really not a big deal in the early 2000s. By the mid 2000s, we started polling cell phones to some extent and landlines. Now we're doing less landlines, more cell phones, and then we try to mix into the polling mix online surveys or texts as well, so that we can get a complete sampling of how the public feels.
Now, how do you choose who you're polling? How is it determined which people you're considering? Tell us about that.
Every pollster has a different recipe. We like to poll off of voting records, so you're getting actually registered voters, and then we like to ask if they plan on voting. And measure to what extent we think they're likely to vote, and then the poll is taken of likely voters. So a lot of pollsters just simply poll either random digit, which means they don't necessarily have to be registered voters. They're just telephone numbers they're pulling out. Some do registered voters without asking if they're likely voters. We like to get to the likely voter level. And we don't choose people. That's a random choice that the telephone systems make for us once we know that universe. And all pollsters are about the same in the way they do that.
Now, talk to me about silent majority. Is there any way to tell on whether people are telling the truth on these polls or not?
Well, no, not the truth, but you can certainly, the way you work the questionnaire. I like to have very short questionnaires so that people know they're not going to be involved in a 20-minute survey, particularly when you have cell phones involved. I mean, who in the world likes to talk on a cell phone for 20 minutes these days, particularly to someone they don't know? So I like to see these be very short surveys. That helps us get a more complete and quick and really a more, I think, accurate response. And then we like to mix it up between live interviews and then also automated, where people can choose by hitting a button without talking to a person, and merge those two, because there is a hidden Trump vote. We know that. We learned that in 2016. It's fairly substantial, and we think it's growing. And the only way to get it is by using this blended approach. And even then, you probably don't get all of it.
Now, do polls shift with themes? For example, this year, especially the COVID-19 pandemic, protests, looting going on in our country. Do you follow themes?
I don't really. I mean, let me just explain to your viewers. So I'm happily retired in Florida. I went to law school here, and when I could finish up, I came back. And so I really wasn't planning on polling this year. My good friend Sean Hannity agreed to do his radio show for the last 3 years, and he sort of got me back in polling a little bit. And then I had a slew of former clients and new clients who said, would you please poll the presidential election? I'm a little late to this game, so I've not been polling the issues like some of the other pollsters have. My specialty is the horse race. That's what I'm known for, is getting that right. I predicted that Trump would win in 2016 when I was the pollster for the Fox owned and operated affiliates around the major ones around the country. I went on the air and I said, sorry, our poll's wrong. I think we're going to win this race. It'd be Trump, not we, but the Trump is going to win. And I was right. Now, whether you're right every single season, who knows? I could be off this time. I think my recipe works, but I've not been looking at the individual issues. I will tell you one issue I have looked at, and that's COVID. We have learned that younger voters, the younger you get, the more they don't want to be going through another shutdown or lockdown. And I think that's a hidden message that really is beginning to come out at the end of the election, and it's showing its strength in, I think, the polling that we're doing that shows President Trump doing much better than some of the other polls, where they feel that the Biden campaign is a little more towards locking the country down again. You see Biden wearing masks and the like when he speaks. Until recently, he shed them in the last week of the campaign in Florida and some other locations. But that is one issue I think that may be the determining issue of this campaign.
Now, going right off of that, I know you said you're a little late to the game this year, but as of right now, how do polls compare to 2016?
They're worse. in general. I mean, that just there's some reasons for that. First of all, the decision desks at the networks and the editors who are in charge of polling and newspapers are insisting on more and more cell phone data. The cell phone data is very difficult, as I alluded to earlier, to get someone to answer their phone when they don't know who's calling. I mean, think about it. Do you? I don't. Most people I know don't. So what it really means is that the cell phone data that these pollsters are using, a lot of it are people who have said, oh yes, I'll be happy to be surveyed in future surveys on politics. Well, that means you've got a hyper-political person. We've learned it tends to skew to the Democratic side of the aisle a little bit, a little more highly educated. And as a result, garbage in, garbage out. And we're all having to deal with it. It's very tough to get an accurate poll these days, whether you're approaching it from my approach or the other approach that I just mentioned. So polling is very difficult these days.
Now, what happens? Are there any penalties? What happens to pollsters if they don't make the right determination at the end?
Well, they should get fired, right? But they don't. Most of the pollsters I know, until they retire or sell or whatever, continue to do this business, and they come back and you see them used over and over again. So there really is no penalty. Maybe the penalty this time will be, if they're all wrong this time, we'll see polling begin to disappear and move to some other metadata type measurement of how the public feels. It really uses AI and doesn't have much to do with the art and the science blend of polling with the way pollsters do it right now, but we're not to that point yet. I think we should get to that point, because I think we're going to find out after this race. I'll give you an example. There's a poll that came out last week that showed Donald Trump losing Wisconsin by 17 points by a major network. I can assure you Donald Trump's not going to lose Wisconsin by 17 points. To put that sort of nonsense out there is embarrassing for the pollster and embarrassing for the news organization. And I don't think people are going to really trust polls again, particularly unless Donald Trump loses by 17 points in Wisconsin, which is considered a battleground state. They're going to really start looking at these things and saying, wow. And let me say, I have Trump up in some polls in some areas like Pennsylvania where the other pollsters don't. If Trump wins by 7 or 8 points, they're going to say, wow, I don't want to listen to Towery again. Well, that's fine. I probably won't be doing it. It doesn't make any difference. But I think we're going to see a change in polling, because it just can't continue the way it is with the current drift towards cell phones and people really using texting more than cell phones to communicate these days.
Well, I guess the golden question to ask you is, what are you as a pollster expecting tonight?
I'm expecting a much closer race than most of the national network polls and newspapers are showing. I expect Florida, I expect to go Trump. Georgia, I expect to go Trump. North Carolina, Trump. Iowa, Trump. Pennsylvania's up for grabs. Wisconsin, I'm not sure about. Michigan is up for grabs. I'm watching Minnesota. I think Minnesota is going to be a shock one. I spotted that a couple of weeks ago. That is a very tight race in a state that hasn't gone Republican in many decades. So I'll keep my eye on that. And Arizona, which I think will end up going Trump. So in other words, this is going to be a much tighter electoral battle than we're being led to believe by most of the news organizations and the other pollsters. It was in 2016. It will be again. Now, I'm not saying necessarily who the victor is going to be, but I will say that you're not going to see Wisconsin 17 points out, and you're probably going to see most of these states a 1 or 2 point victory for one side or the other. So it's going to be a narrow race.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, that's it, except I'll be glad when this is over.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We're excited to see how your determinations will pan out.
Okay, great. Thank you.